Make Iran Great Again, or MIGA. I can just see the caps now. That's what President Donald Trump is calling for after a very successful military attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. The 3 nuclear sites where they were enriching uranium, where they were trying to get uranium up to 60 and even 90%, so that they could procure and build some kind of nuclear weapon, along with ICBMs, which would then be able to deliver those nukes anywhere in the world. And of course, since Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror and just plain kooky, Donald Trump has repeatedly said that can never happen. But he has continued, as has his staff, to claim that this is not about regime change. In fact, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on Sunday morning at a Pentagon briefing said this to the press.
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The president authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
And that is something that has been reiterated by every member of his cabinet, every member of Donald Trump's administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance.
Our view has been very clear that we don't want a regime change. We do not want to protract this or build this out any more than it's already been built out. We want to end their nuclear program, and then we want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here. We believe very strongly that there are 2 pathways. There's a pathway where Iran continues to fund terrorism, continues to try to build a nuclear program, attacks American troops. That's the bad pathway for Iran, and it will be met with overwhelming force. There's another pathway on the table here. There's a pathway where Iran integrates itself into the international community, stops funding terrorism, and stops trying to pursue a nuclear weapon. This is a reset. This is an opportunity for the Iranians to take the smart path. We certainly hope that they will.
Yeah, and that is something that Donald Trump has reiterated. But look, if the Iranians aren't going to take the smart path, if they're going to take the stupid path, if the Iranians aren't looking at this going, wow, the United States of America just executed one of the most strategic military attacks in history, where there was no prior knowledge of them coming. There was no leaks about them coming. There was massive misdirection, and there were no fatalities or casualties or loss of American assets. In fact, the reports from General Raisin Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said, I'll be honest with you, we don't think that Iran even fired at one of our aircraft. We don't think they fired a shot. We don't even know if they scrambled any of their air force. There was not a single Iranian plane in the sky while our strike package was taking things out.
But initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of 4th and 5th generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals.
And nobody knew it was coming until it was over, and that was the whole plan. And it was not for regime change. It was to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Although now maybe it's a little bit about regime change. President Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA. MIGA. And of course, everybody in the press and a lot of folks on the left are saying Donald Trump is now trying to go be a nation builder. But what Donald Trump usually does is he puts forth in motion movements like Make America Great Again. This time, however, he's trying to inspire the folks in Iran, the 92 million Iranians who realize that their regime is destructive, their regime is oppressive, their regime is the reason why there are all of these attacks, and that their regime has taken their country's identity, their country's economy, their country's religion, and used it, weaponized it against the rest of the world. Again, because they cray. But Donald Trump says maybe this is the beginning of the end of that. If I can inspire the 92 million Iranians to rise up against their regime, change it. Change it and put in somebody who is not hell-bent on war, but somebody who would come to the table and negotiate, because that's all that they ever wanted. And that is something that J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and all the other of the president's men have been explaining ad nauseum all weekend on the Sunday shows to whomever will listen.
What we've said to the Iranians is we do not want war with Iran. We actually want peace. But we want peace in the context of them not having a nuclear weapons program. And that's exactly what the president accomplished last night. I really think there are two big questions for the Iranians here. Are they going to attack American troops, or are they going to continue with their nuclear weapons program? And if they leave American troops out of it and they decide to give up their nuclear weapons program once and for all, then I think the president has been very clear. We can have a good relationship with the Iranians. We can have a peaceful situation in that region of the world. We have to step back a little bit, Kristen, and remind ourselves that we negotiated aggressively with the Iranians to try to find a peaceful settlement to this conflict. It was only when the president decided that the Iranians were not negotiating in good faith that he took this action. He didn't take it lightly, but I actually think it provides an opportunity to reset this relationship, reset these negotiations, and get us in a place where Iran can decide not to be a threat to its neighbors, not to be a threat to the United States. And if they're willing to do that, the United States is all ears.
And if they're not willing to do that, Donald Trump says, well, then maybe we need a regime change in Iran. We need somebody who is MAGA, who is make Iran great again, who is, instead of being a bully, as Donald Trump has called Iran, instead of being the terror, the state, the sponsor of terror that they become, instead of being just, a fly in the ointment, a real pain in the booty, instead of all that, why doesn't Iran become a productive part of the Middle East and join a growing alliance of countries that Donald Trump is building through economic development, through the Abraham Accords, through military action, through all kinds of diplomacy? I mean, what Donald Trump has been able to do in his first term and very quickly in his second term is build an alliance of countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And when you look at the Abraham Accords from his first time around, he's seriously considering looking at Egypt and Jordan and maybe even other countries in the area to put pressure on folks like Iran who have been acting up and stop the attacks on Israel, stop the attacks on the American assets, stop funding Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and anyone else whose name starts with an H. And instead of destruction, get into revitalization of the area. Remember, Donald Trump said that Gaza could be the Riviera of the Mediterranean. It could be the Riviera of the Middle East. He's looking for all kinds of economic development because he knows that along with economic development comes money, and along with money comes peace. Because where people put their money, they don't put their bombs. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said we also have been very interested in diplomacy with Iran, but they don't seem to be interested in diplomacy with us, or they think they can play us. But they forgot they're dealing not with former presidents, but with the current president, Donald J. Trump.
This is very simple. The president wants to resolve this diplomatically and peacefully. He gave them a chance to do that. They delayed. They had all these kind of delay tactics. They wouldn't even meet with us directly. We had to go through third countries. This is very simple. Let's meet directly. Let's work on agreements that are good for Iran and good for the Iranian people in particular, good for the safety and security of the world and the United States. That's always been our preference. That continues to be our preference. But they're the ones that were playing games with us. And these are the consequences. We had to achieve those objectives. We had 3 objectives yesterday: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. We conducted a brilliant military operation under the command of President Trump, and obviously great credit to Secretary Hegseth and General Kurilla and General Kaye and all the airmen and the phenomenal people in the U.S. military. No other military in the world could have done this.
No,
we've achieved those objectives. What happens next is up to the regime. Okay, the regime wants peace. We're ready for peace. They want to do something else. They're incredibly vulnerable. They can't even protect their own airspace.
That is Marco Rubio chatting with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation, who I still don't understand why they let her talk to people who are clearly more informed and intelligent than she is. She tried to argue with Secretary of State / National Security Advisor Marco Rubio about the intelligence that clearly she hasn't seen, but that Marco Rubio has, and she tried to explain to him what the intelligence meant. Well, luckily Marco Rubio was there to explain to her exactly what did happen, and it was clearly the opposite of what she thought.
Are you saying there that the United States did not see intelligence that the Supreme Leader had ordered weaponization?
That's irrelevant. I see that question being asked in the media. That's an irrelevant question.
No,
they have
that is
everything
the
they need
key
to build
point
a weapon.
in U.S. intelligence assessment. You know that.
No, it's not.
Yes, it was.
No, it's
that
not.
The political decision had not been made.
I know that better than you know that, and I know that that's not the case.
But I'm asking you whether the order was given.
And the people who say that, it doesn't matter if the order was given. They have everything they need to build nuclear weapons. Why would you bury things in a mountain, 300 feet under the ground?
Right.
Why would you bury why do they have 60% enriched uranium? You don't need 60% enriched uranium. The only countries in the world that have uranium at 60% are countries that have nuclear weapons. Because they can quickly make it 90. They have all the elements. They have. Why do they have a space program? Is Iran going to go to the moon? No. They're trying to build an ICBM.
No, but that's a question. That's a question of intent. And you know, in the intelligence assessment, that it was that Iran wanted to be a threshold state and use this leverage. I'm talking about the public March assessment, and that's why I was asking you if you know something more from March.
But that's also an inaccurate representation of it. That's an accurate representation of it. That's not how intelligence is read. That's not how intelligence is used. Here's what the whole world knows. Forget about intelligence. What the IAEA knows. They are enriching uranium well beyond anything you need for a civil nuclear program. So why would you enrich uranium at 60%? Right. If you don't intend to one day use it to take it to 90 and build a weapon. Right. Why are you developing ICBMs? Why do you have 8,000 short-range missiles and 2,000 to 3,000 long mid-range missiles that you continue to develop? Why do you do all these things? They have everything they need for a nuclear weapon. They have the delivery mechanisms, they have the enrichment capability, they have the highly enriched uranium that is stored. Yes. That's all we need to see. Right. Well, especially in the hands of a regime that's already involved in terrorism and proxies and all kinds of things around. They are the source of all instability.
And no one's disputing that. I'm not doing that here. And they were censured at the IAEA for that enrichment and for violating their non-proliferation agreements. I was simply asking if we had intelligence that there was an order to weaponize, because you said weaponization ambitions.
Well, we have intelligence that they have everything they need to build a nuclear weapon, and that's more than enough.
I mean, that is, when you're not going to argue with the Secretary of State / National Security Advisor about intelligence that you haven't seen, are you? You're not going to argue about one of the most successful military attacks that took out 3 nuclear facilities without a single hair being harmed on any American's head, or without anyone even knowing it was happening until Donald Trump's Truth Social post. But yet there she is, Margaret Brennan, on Face the Nation, and she is doing her best to show that when it comes to a lack of intelligence, she leads the entire world. This is not a war that Donald Trump has started, and the Democrats are going to continue to rail against him. In fact, Jasmine Crockett and AOC and Bernie Sanders and the rest of the usual suspects have already been on their various social media platforms trying to explain to everybody that Donald Trump has broken the Constitution once again. Donald Trump has violated his oath of office, and that Donald Trump should be impeached. He should be impeached, I tell you, because I don't even know if they're really sure why he should be impeached this time, but it's been a hot minute since they've called for impeachment, so this is as good a time as any. But President Donald Trump and Congress looking to come to blows again over what was a necessary, a successful, and a very constitutional strike against a potential enemy, not an act of war, and not, of course, a declaration of war. In fact, Maria Bartiromo on Fox News had Marco Rubio on again. Guy was very busy yesterday, and asked him, "Are we at war with Iran?" And he basically said, "No. Look, here's what really went down."
Are we now at war with Iran?
No, we're not. This is not a war against Iran. This is very simple. 67 days ago, the President of the United States sent the Iranians a letter, and it said, you're not going to have nuclear weapons. You're not going to have a militarized nuclear program. Let's negotiate. I want to do this diplomatically. I want to do this peacefully. They tried to play him along the way they've played every American president for the last 35 years. And, the president told them, if we don't get a deal, which is what he wanted, then I'll have to handle it differently. And that's what he did last night. He handled it differently. But that was an Iranian choice. We didn't make that choice. They did. By playing games with Donald Trump, they made a huge mistake. And President Trump acted last night. And I think the world today is safer and more stable than it was 24 hours ago. And a bunch of these countries putting out statements condemning us privately, they all agree with us that this needed to be done. They got to do what they got to do for, their own public relations purposes. But the only people in the world that are unhappy about what happened in Iran last night is the regime.
And also several Democrats, let's not forget them. But he's also right about that. All of these countries that are putting out statements, whether it's Russia or China or North Korea, none of them are upset that Iran's nuclear program has been decimated, because when you're a nuclear power, you don't want anyone else to be a nuclear power. When you have nuclear warheads, you don't want any other country to have nuclear warheads. And of course, when Iran controls as much of the oil in this world as it does, you don't want them to use that to threaten the sanctity of the other nations around the globe. And in fact, China is one of the largest consumers of Iranian oil. So closing the Strait of Hormuz or shutting down oil production or anything that Iran has declared they're going to do is going to be met with swift action from China, because China is one of their biggest customers. Donald Trump, this is not Donald Trump's first time in office. Donald Trump has not surrounded himself with idiots. Donald Trump has very capable people under his command and in charge of his military actions. General Raisin Kane went through a long litany of how successful this mission was. Most importantly, the misdirection that caused complete and total surprise on the part of the Iranians once the Americans attacked.
Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the president stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon.
And that is something that not only was the first use, but the most successful use. Not only the first use, but like the first 6 uses, because they dropped a whole bunch of them. And President Donald Trump has reiterated the fact that Iran's future lies in Iran's hands, and that the leaders of Iran can make a choice. They can come to the table and they can try to come up with a diplomatic agreement to end the battle with Israel and the battle with the United States of America. If they want to live peacefully with the rest of the world wants them to live peacefully as well. But they can't have a nuclear weapon. And not only Donald Trump, but a lot of other countries have been solidified in that stance. Donald Trump actually, executed. Donald Trump actually believes it, I think, more than others, and shows it. He's not just a man of words; he's a man of action. But that is something that he's never wavered from, nor will he ever. Especially when you have Iran chanting "death to America" as recently as last week, when they have a big clock, a timetable for the destruction of Israel and the Israeli people and murdering of Jews and Americans for no reason abroad, when they've had sleeper cells here in the United States and all over Europe, when they've taken hostages and funded terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and all these others. Donald Trump said, look, there's going to be peace or there's going to be tragedy. Those are the only two ways this ends, and it's all up to Iran.
With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days.
And that is something that Donald Trump means. And after the midnight hammer mission over the weekend, that is something that not only does Donald Trump mean, but now the rest of the world understands that he means what he says, whatever it is he happens to say. There is a lot more, of course, coming up every single minute. We get new reports from the Pentagon. We're going to get new reports from President Donald Trump. We may even get a press conference later today, which would be thrilling. And we will cover all of that information on our second podcast every single day at 1 p.m. We are live, or you can go to your favorite podcast platform and listen at your leisure. All you have to do is go to iTunes or Spotify or iHeart, search Mark Kaye Saves the Republic, download, listen, and enjoy.